Opening the king's diagonal immediately opens attacking lines and prepares swift development. Instantly seizing a central pawn majority, Sicilian defense crafts an imbalanced battlefield, promising dynamic counterplay. Developing the knight immediately aims for central influence and prepares castling, a solid start to contesting the open Sicilian. Developing the knight to c6 is a flexible response, preparing for a robust pawn structure and challenging central influence. Opening the center immediately forces a confrontation, creating dynamic play and opportunities for pawn breaks. Accepting the pawn opens the c-file, a vital artery for the rook. The knight decisively occupies the center, challenging black's pawn structure and controlling key squares. Unleashing the knight to pressure the central pawn initiates a typical Sicilian defense skirmish, forcing white to react. Asserting central influence and preparing rapid piece development, this maneuver aims to stifle black's counterplay. Solidifying the pawn chain, black prepares to develop the bishop and contest the center's control. A natural developing piece, the bishop prepares to castle and eye the d6 pawn. Opening up the center with that pawn immediately creates a complex pawn structure and forces a decision about the knight's future. Safeguarding the knight's retreat while maintaining central influence, this retreat subtly prepares for potential pawn advances and a more robust kingside presence. Solidifying the pawn structure and preparing for castling, this piece activity supports the central advance while keeping options open. Prioritizing king safety, white tucks their monarch away, preparing to connect the rooks and enter the middle game with a secure king. Securing the king amidst the central skirmish creates a solid defensive platform. Unleashing an aggressive pawn thrust aims to disrupt black's kingside structure and seize central space. Opening the center is often a double-edged sword, as it exposes your king while also creating dynamic possibilities. Opening the bishop's diagonal significantly increases pressure on black's central pawns. Reinforcing the central pawn majority while preparing to contest the d-file is a sound strategic choice. Unveiling the king's diagonal, this bishop strategically eyes the queenside and prepares for pawn advancement. A dynamic redeployment, the knight establishes a strong central outpost, immediately contesting key squares and preparing for potential kingside breakthroughs. Shifting the monarch to the side safeguards it from potential diagonal attacks and prepares for a central pawn push. Challenging the bishop's central influence, this move eyes the queenside and seeks to disrupt white's coordination before the f-pawn advance can truly pay off. Relocating the queen to this diagonal improves its influence on the queenside pawns and prepares for potential kingside advances. Liberating the c-pawn by capturing the bishop untangles black's forces and opens lines for counterplay. Opens a clear diagonal for your queen and secures that central pawn, but sacrifices a touch of piece coordination for now. Initiating a pawn structure imbalance opens new avenues and potential weaknesses for both sides. Opening the file gives your rook pressure, but consider if that queen is truly trapped or just playing hide-and-seek. Re-engaging the queen on the queenside aims to disrupt white's central pawns and potentially create threats along the b-file. Opening the file creates attacking potential, though it does expose the pawn structure. Striking the queenside pawn opens the file for your rook, aiming for active play despite the slightly awkward pawn structure. Shifting the rook to the 5th rank initiates a flank pressure, aiming to exploit the weakened queenside pawns and disrupt black's harmony. Shifting the queen to safety addresses the immediate attack while aiming to consolidate the knight outpost. Sharpening the queenside pressure, this challenges the misplaced black queen and seeks to exploit the open file. Repositioning the bishop to d8 aims to reinforce the queenside pawn structure and prepare for potential queen activity, although it does leave the king slightly exposed. Unleashing a powerful central pawn push, white disrupts black's queenside setup and opens critical lines for attack. The knight embarks on an adventurous journey, aiming to disrupt white's central pawn structure and potentially create threats on the queenside. Unleashing a tactical storm, this move targets black's vulnerable king position and opens avenues for aggressive piece play. Rerouting the knight aims to disrupt white's central influence and target potential weaknesses. The queen repositions, creating threats on the third rank and preparing to contest the open file. Solidifying the pawn structure and preparing for a central pawn push are the primary aims here. Targeting the kingside with knight outposts, this maneuver eyes squares near black's uncastled monarch. Securing the queenside flank, preparing for potential pawn pushes, and creating a defensive screen for the king. Aggressive attacking intentions emerge, aiming to exploit potential king weakness amidst a complex pawn structure. Solidifying the e-file presence and preparing for potential pawn advances adds crucial defensive resilience. Unleashing a pawn storm, white aims to pry open the kingside and target black's exposed monarch. This pawn thrust weakens the kingside defense, creating potential targets. Repositioning the queen to a more active square, eyeing potential breakthroughs along the central files. Reinforcing the knight's pressure on the c-file creates a dynamic blockade. Preparing to seize the open files, the bishop retreats to a more active diagonal. Attempting to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and create counterplay on the queenside. Launching an aggressive pawn storm, white aims to pry open the kingside, creating attacking pathways despite the piece imbalance. Unlocking counterplay along the queenside, this pawn advance seeks to disrupt white's encroaching pieces and create opportunities for black's queenside majority. The queen's repositioning attempts to disrupt black's compact pawn structure and offers a surprising diagonal threat. Seeking active counterplay, this knight repositions to potentially disrupt white's queenside pressure. Seizing the initiative to unravel black's pawn shield, this capture opens lines for a decisive attack against the unprotected king. Sacrificing the bishop to expose the kingside and gain initiative is a bold but potentially risky choice, aiming for counterplay. Sacrificing the knight on f6 decisively opens the king's defenses and leverages black's overloaded queen. Opening the g-file irrevocably exposes the king, inviting a swift attack. The open f-file now becomes a decisive weapon, threatening to dismantle the black king's defenses. Desperation sets in, seeking to escape the crushing attack and prevent further material loss. Unleashing a powerful rook swing, white seeks to dismantle black's queenside pawn structure and exploit the exposed king. Reclaiming material, black opens a critical diagonal and challenges white's aggressive pawn structure, creating newfound counterplay. Securing the exchange and exposing black's shattered pawn structure dictates the endgame's trajectory. King liberation from its shackles, aiming to stir up activity on the open files. Unleashing a pawn storm with g5 dramatically simplifies the position, aiming to expose black's king and create immediate threats on the kingside. The king's shield is shattered, opening a brutal assault. The king's exposed position now invites a decisive check that will simplify into a winning material advantage. A bold king sortie into open territory, a desperate gambit to disrupt the relentless pawn advance and potentially exploit the undefended white king. The king, exposed on the 7th rank, faces immediate annihilation. Relinquishing the h-file control opens avenues for immediate counterplay. The king remains exposed in the center. Seizing the pawn forces the king into a precarious central cage, exposing it to the white queen's relentless pressure. Reinforcing the king's defensive perimeter becomes paramount as the material disparity intensifies. Unleashing a check, white aims to force the opponent's king into a vulnerable square, disrupting black's defensive setup. The king vacates the dangerous central dark squares, seeking refuge on the lighter squares where white's remaining pieces have less influence. Disrupting the kingside structure, this king hunt aims to exploit black's compromised pawn shield for a decisive advantage. King's safety is paramount. This retreat offers vital breathing room against aggressive piece play. Forcing the black king to a less safe square opens up opportunities to exploit the weakened pawn structure. Holding the king on the g-file offers no immediate escape and invites further exchanges, possibly simplifying into a losing endgame. Consolidating the king's safety is paramount before launching any further pawn advances. A bold check forcing a decision, but will the exposed king survive the ensuing complexity? The king's exposed position after this move invites further danger. Sacrificing the rook for pawn activity offers a dynamic path to escape the passive position. A desperate attempt to salvage material by white, but the exposed king and lack of coordination seal its fate. The black rook retreats, seeking safer haven from the rampant white queen and bishop threat. The white queen eyes the vulnerable black king, forcing a defensive pawn push that opens more lines. Seeking refuge for the king on the edge of the board while white's queen hunts, a defensive maneuver. Pushing the pawn forward opens lines and creates a potential passed pawn, but also weakens the king's cover. A desperate check, seeking any flicker of counterplay in a lost position. Seeking shelter for the exposed monarch, a necessary retreat to escape the immediate onslaught of black's counterplay. Shifting the rook to the king side offers attacking potential, threatening the vulnerable white king. Opening the d-file to potentially create unstoppable passed pawns is a powerful gambit for control. A bold attempt to reignite the kingside attack, sacrificing material for initiative. Prying open the kingside now creates immediate threats against the exposed monarch. Unleashing the rook into the heart of white's territory, black aims to disrupt the pawn structure and create immediate complications for the king. Unlocking the d-file opens a potent avenue for the white queen and rook to penetrate black's defenses. Desperation flares, hoping to disrupt white's king hunt, but it's far too late. King's safety is paramount, and bringing the king closer might be too adventurous with open lines. Initiating a risky mating attack, black offers yet another check to expose white's vulnerable monarch. Pushing the king into potential discovery is a bold gambit for activity. Introducing a new defensive layer for the king, the rook shifts to secure the 7th rank and prepare for potential counterplay. Pushing the e-pawn advances the endgame and aims to disrupt black's pawn structure, potentially opening lines for the white king.